Hello, 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 everybody. Want to give a shout out to all my lokes, all my fellow veterans out there, family, friends. Hope everyone's doing well. I've had a wonderful week. It's a beautiful sunny Saturday here in South Click. And what I wanted to talk to you about today is I want to talk about PEDs and MMA and the USADA con. Now I don't even know where to start. This is such a big and immense subject. But if we look back at the history of MMA, like all sports, PDs have been around since the very beginning. I mean, even since UFC 1, if you go back and look at Mr. Shamrock, you can't tell me that guy wasn't on some kind of juice. He was part of wrestling as well, where all those guys are using. That guy was massively ripped and muscular, and that's UFC 1. So even since the very inception of the UFC and mixed martial arts, PDs have been part of the culture. Now, as time has gone on and we've seen more and more people under the present era and throughout the years pop for different PDs. I mean, even in old days, we had guys that weren't under as a strict system as USADA is today. Um, like Tim Sylvia popped, Josh Barnett popped, Sean Shirt popped, and on it goes. You could probably go back and look at the list. I mean, even the earlier days, you got guys that most people don't know, like Cowboy Cerrone, who popped, and Brian Ortega, who popped. I mean, just the list of people who have been caught with PEDs is innumerable. With that being said, we're under a new era now. We're into this USADA game, and you know, we have to look back to the inception of why USADA was brought into the beginning of it and what was going on with the UFC at the time. We weren't seeing a lot of positive tests. We were seeing some here and there, like I just named, but it wasn't massive, numerous amounts of people getting caught. They were actually, under the old system of the athletic commission's testing. The testing wasn't as thorough or as big, and they're pretty easy tests to pass for the most part. Most of them like pre-fight and post-fight tests, and that's pretty much about it. That means the guys could juice all through their camp, use whatever they wanted to, and they just had to cycle off before the competition came in order that they wouldn't pop for those commission testing. But that got a lot of criticism from places like New York. And New York was a big market for the UFC that they didn't get in for a long time. If you remember, Senator John McCain, uh, among other people, were very negative towards the sport, calling it human cockfighting, and a lot because of the inception of the way that it was marketed at the beginning, being, two men enter, only one comes out, and it came out as this really violent blood sport competition and this real shock appeal thing, and that, in order to get the sport legitimized, has changed over the years. I mean, first, without taking away, it used to just be you fought until the fight was over. There was no breaks. There was no time periods or rest. But in order to legitimize UFC and MMA in general, they started taking on time periods and breaks and corners and the refereeing and the rules were. I mean, the refereeing was there since the beginning, but it got more stringent, and then the rules became more stringent and then more unified, as we even have unified rules today of MMA. What this did was allow the sport to gain a more sport-like look and following and legitimacy, because we already have accepted, since before the turn of last century, boxing, which has been around since like the late 1800s, and which it at first was much like MMA. And a lot of people don't think about what the original fights that they had weren't just fist fights. They could kick, they could clinch. There was wrestling in the old days where boxing first started. It wasn't until the Queensberry rules were added that a lot of that stuff was done away with, and then boxing is what you kind of seen today, And it's, of course, it's evolved over time and become more modern with the culture and more sport-like looking. But boxing was already accepted, but MMA wasn't. So they pretty much followed the boxing pattern and incorporating the different rules and time limits and the 10-point must system, the judges scoring, that kind of stuff, in order to make it look like something that was already accepted. Well, when Zuffa took over the UFC, they took, for a lot of years, it was very fledgling. It was through the Ultimate Fighter that really the show kind of built on a little bit more legitimacy, because they were able to see these fighters as people just like you and me, and as athletes that had a lot of heart and courage and determination. We're trying to make a way for them and their family, and it kind of softened people's hearts. And as well as the Bonner Griffin fight got people excited, because the amount of intensity in that fight, the pace that they put in that fight, it was just, that was a really great fight, especially for that point in time. But Zuffa, as it went along for a while, it kind of got to the point where it hit its zenith. And that was probably, McGregor was a big part of hitting that high peak. A lot of money was put into the UFC. The Fertittas had been in it for a long time, and obviously, as we know, they wanted to capitalize on their business. I think they actually wanted to. There was some speculation of them getting involved in an NFL deal in Las Vegas. That might have been what was going on. That deal never seemed to materialize, but still, they still have a lot of money in casinos and in Vegas and in property and all sorts of other markets too. They're billionaires. So in order to sell the company, there were some things that they did that were very smart. Uh, for one, they added uniforms. We had the Reebok deal, which wasn't good for anybody as far as the fighters are concerned, but for the sport and making it look less underground and more mainstream, adopted, the Reebok apparel, and everybody looks the same and similar, and that gives it a more of a feel like the NBA, the NFL, required outfits and uniforms, and it's under a known, well popular company, and so that was done. Also, what was done um, was the addition of USADA. Now, what USADA did was it lended credibility to the UFC. USADA, the UFC, there was complaints about the PED usage, and I really feel it was Dana himself that really brought it up. It was a smart move, talking about how PED use is rampant, how they're cleaning up the sport, and they're going to enact the hardest drug testing policy of any pro sport. That's the narrative they created. The UFC is brilliant at doing this. They're able to create the narrative, control it, and the fans, for the most part, buy into what's being said. And you're buying in from a guy that you can go back and watch hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews in, where he has made claim after claim after claim that was rather shown to be lies and falsehoods. How are you ever going to trust anything this guy ever says? Everything that comes out of his mouth is bogus. It's bogus. He's a promoter. He's just like Don King and the rest of the guys. They're out there. They're slimy greaseball guys that are out there in the business of selling fights and making money. And fighting is a dirty business. So USADA gets brought in with this chronicle or this narrative of being the strictest testing in the sport, blah, 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 blah. And they come in, and now they start having different people pop here and there. As people started to pop, it even gave more clarity. More credibility to the USADA UFC program, showing that they're cleaning up the sport. Especially when John Jones was hit, uh, and it took out the Daniel Cormier fight. What looked to be a big money making fight. So there, you have legitimacy. Also, plus they brought in over Jeff Nowitzki, who has this good reputation from busting Lance Armstrong, or investigating rather. He didn't necessarily, but Lance Armstrong wasn't busted until he came and confessed, but rather trying to take down Lance Armstrong and that whole investigation. of which, if you go back and actually study, Nowitzki got a good name for working with USADA and being a government agent, but in testimony, the guy was slimy as crap. He dug through the guy's trash. He would watch through the windows of his house with binoculars while he has a whole family and kids and a wife and stuff there. Tell me that's not creepy. And they even executed searches of different labs like Valco without proper warrants. Uh, and they also fudged legal documents and gave bunk testimony in court. The guy was slimy. He wasn't there to bring down Lance Armstrong and clean up the sport of cycling. The guy could give a shit less. The guy was there for one thing and one thing alone. And you need to know this about Nowitzki. Nowitzki is there for his own self ego and narcissism. The guy is a textbook narcissist. You can tell he is a straight liar. The guy, watch on interviews, even from talking about John to TJ, and the two things that he says in each thing. One, he says he's not an expert. Then he becomes out and he is the expert. The guy is slimy, and pretty much what he is, and he's about making a name for himself and making a good popular assessment by the public for himself and making good cash. And coming over to the UFC, Nowitzki no longer worked for USADA, but yet he's acting like he's USADA at first until Jones gets popped, and then he doesn't understand all this stuff. And you have to go ask USADA. Come on, man. He's posturing in different positions, playing both sides with the public, and people fall for it. They don't see how blatant it is. But let's even look at the USADA setup. USADA is crooked. It's a con, guys. If you don't understand that, it is a huge freaking con. It is not a legitimate thing the way that it's set up. And we can start just from the way that it functions. For one, it functions with someone that used to work for them, not working for them, but representing them and representing their client, the UFC, from whom he's paid to do their interests. USADA is not paid for by the athletes. USADA is paid for by the UFC. And those tests are like $20,000 to $30,000 per test. We're talking about, go on the USADA website, see the numbers of tests they've administered through the year. You're talking multi-millions of dollars. An obscene amount of money. But they're paid for those tests by the people that they should be independent of. In boxing, you have WADA testing. I believe it's the WBC, or I think they have a mandatory, or not a mandatory, but a voluntary doping program in which the boxers pay for their doping tests, which they don't appreciate because it's like $20,000 to $30,000, along with all the licensing fees. And boxing's corrupt too. Let's not play any games, but at least there's no conflict of interest. The testing agency isn't being paid by the organization for whom the fighter is fighting for. That in itself is a conflict of interest. They're being paid, and there's no way they're going to be an unbiased third party, as in with boxing. In boxing, we just saw Jarrell Miller. He got popped, not with one substance, but with 4 substances before a huge payday Joshua fight. And that's because if, say, the WBA, the WBO, the IBF was paying for his test, then they would be on the hook with that agency. But here, but with boxing, it's not. They came out by the fighters, so they're under no qualms about how the test comes out. But with the UFC, whatever they release, if it's negative for the UFC, as we recently saw with John Jones and Picogate, it was a bad look for the UFC. And what did the UFC in fact do? They changed an entire venue, screwed out all their fans, went to a whole new commission, and got a fight sanctioned that that the original state wouldn't sanction in order to save that fight and that money. Now, there's some things that from these things we can see between TJ and John, and now this recent bust with Paul Acosta. We can see some trends in USADA that if you don't see them, you need to wake up. This is not above board. First, the UFC is paying for the testing. That in itself, go to any ethics teacher, any business teacher in any college, and find out if that's an ethical business practice. It is an unethical business practice. That in itself should be a number one red flag. Another unethical business practice, which isn't necessarily with anything with testing, is that the USC is the promoter. They're the they are the person who actually provides the championships or the belt or the sanctioning agency, and they pay the fighters. They control all of those things. Which in boxing you have the Muhammad Ali Act, which allows that those things have to be split up. You've got the promoters, one party, then the you've got you got people that are paying or backing the fight. Then you also have the organization or the belts that are being put up or on the line. They're all separate entities to try to stop corruption, although there still is corruption. But those are at least some checks and balances to keep them from being able to control the whole field. The UFC controls all of it. It's all in their pocket, and they can do what they want. Going back to USADA, though, being paid for the UFC, unethical. Also, what we saw recently with TJ getting busted for EPO, and he got 2 years on a first time, while John Jones gets his first one. He gets for two banned substances. He gets, I think he got 6 months to a year. He gets busted again for T-ball. He serves like a 13 to 15 month suspension. So that's a second offense, which he should have at least got 2 years. Gets or to possibly even 4 years, but gets a slap on the wrist. We also know that he obviously snitched on somebody, which I'm going to get to that in a moment too. So he should have got a much longer ban, but he didn't. And he had no evidence, not even tainted. The first one was tainted supplement, which it was on a receipt ordered from the same lab with the dick pills were showing on that lab receipt. Also, with just an order of Clomid or Clomiphene on the same freaking invoice. Hello? If that's not proof in itself that somebody's buying PEDs and dick pills at the same time. That's just a way to cover it up. But that was washed under the rug, and people just kept going. He pops again for a substance that his brother's pops for, and it was already in the system pulsing. He gets no suspension time. It's pulsing, which that science is proven nowhere. That pulsing of a year and a half later crap, it doesn't exist. Go show me where that exists, and I will change my tune, because I've looked, I've researched, I've read the reports, the studies. It don't exist. It all came out of the mouth of Nowitzki, and it's all utter bullcrap and lies. But TJ, who isn't a draw, who isn't anything, he gets 2 years first offense, and he gets crucified because of EPO. Well, first of all, we can see there that it's not square across the board for everybody. Everybody doesn't get the same treatment, the same conditions. EPA is, it's worse than, Turinabol. They're both PEDs. And this other guy has popped since then, and since then, and since then, he gets a pass. Well, TJ is not much of a draw. He's not well liked, and he just happened to get beat by the 25-pounder, which hurts his selling potential. Gets thrown under the bus. And he also gets thrown under the bus because everybody lost credibility in the UFC and faith in USADA, and they had to get their credibility back. So what better way than take out a guy who's a high-profile guy who we can't sell anymore, and let's throw him under the bus. Let's also create some other speculation here, which I'll get to, about EPO, and that gains us back some credibility and makes us look like we're popping guys. And then they bring Costa out. Costa is just getting suspended for 6 months, which is retroactive back to a date. for something he confessed to over a year ago for something that happened 2 years ago. Tell me that doesn't smell funny. When you get caught or when you confess, I remember BJ Penn confessed to using an IV and he immediately got suspended for the 6 months. But Costa gets a year wait and then 2 years from the original date, and it's already being backdated from certain time. It never affected him, which shows you this. They creating the appearance of punishing PEDs, but they're not really doing it. Look, TJ's was the one, he got thrown under the bus. Let's just be honest what it is. But what did we learn from that too? The EPO isn't being tested for. So you mean to tell me these tests that cost $20,000 to $30,000, they're not testing for EPO, which is probably the most perfect drug, the most advantageous drug that can be used in the sport of mixed martial arts, and they're not testing for it? And this is coming from Nowitzki, who his main area of expertise and history with testing and Lance Armstrong is the use of EPO, and he's not making sure that they're testing for EPO, and then he excuses USADA for doing it because of the cost involved, as if the test don't already cost $20,000 to $30,000. Wake the fuck up, people. They are spitting things. They're using a pretty good publicist who is spitting that crap right on your head, and people are buying into it. It drives me insane. Get an education. Please go to college if you're buying this crap. Go up. You can do your FAFSA. You can get a Pell Grant. You can start at a community college, and you'll make money to go to school. Just get some education and start learning some critical thinking. By God. Please, because if you buy this stuff, your IQ is so low. I'm just keeping it real, not meaning to be insultive. I want you to not be duped by this bullcrap. And it's bullcrap, that's what it is. Now with Costa, it's a slap on the wrist. It doesn't hurt or affect him. It's 6 months backdated from something a year ago. And plus, look at the guy, man. If you tell me he's not using PEDs, come on, man. You're crazy. You're absolutely crazy. Nobody has that good look natural. Natural muscle is smooth in appearance. Look at Men's Health. On the cover of the Men's Health, guys, they make sure to put natural, great-looking guys on those covers. And you can tell a huge difference between that and ripped and striated and veiny-looking muscular appearance. That is what happens when you use steroids and performance-enhancing drugs. That guy is so using that stuff, and he's been using IVs because IVs can dilute it in your substance that allows you to mask it and get away with cheating. Now, what they've allowed here, too, if you guys haven't seen, it's very obvious that USADA is showing the athletes where the holes in their policies are, how they can actually cheat and get away with it and it not hurt them, but it make USADA and the UFC continue to look legit. This IV, okay, first of all, it shows that we're only testing for EPO 30% of the time. We've only caught 2 people in the history of the USADA program, which has been going on, 5 or more years now? And they've only caught 2 people on EPO? And one of them was TJ, and they said that somebody may have informed on him? So number one, they're not testing for EPO. They're saying, guys, we're pretty much going to be able to, you can pretty much use EPO if you're not stupid about it and you don't overdo it. It's a fast-acting one, microdose it, and you can get away with it. They're also saying, guys, if you get hit with an IV, for one, it's really hard for us to catch you using an IV, but it very, very well covers PED usage. So go ahead, use your PEDs, and take an IV. If you get caught with an IV, then what? Then we give you a 6-month suspension. You don't get caught for the PEDs, and it gets backdated, and you're only probably fighting twice a year anyway, so it even hurts you. And during that suspension time, you can use all the juice you freaking want. Come on, man. See it. The other thing that you see from John Jones is if you inform, you can get away with stuff. If we catch you and you snitch on somebody else, who I believe who John Jones snitched on was the coaches at Jackson Winklejohn that were supplying the substances, so he didn't even snitch on another team member. I don't know that, but it came out soon after John that there was a guy that was providing them in his gym. John got off with a short suspension. That's another loophole around the system. So IVs is a loophole. EPO and not testing for it often is a loophole. Also a loophole that many of you don't know, but the fighters already do know, is that you can miss 2 tests. If they show up at your address within 2 periods, within 18 months, and you don't test or you duck the inspector, you'll get a negative mark, but it's not reported to the public, and it's not a suspension. It's not until 3rd time within 18 months that you are suspended for it's seen as a violation. And they get tested pre and post fight, meaning whenever you're tested within those 18 months and you missed a couple, and then you get tested, and then you test again, well, those oldest tests fall off. So those missed tests, they fall off, and you start anew, meaning people can continually work the system and miss tests. So they can miss tests. They can take IVs. Their EPO's barely tested for. They can inform. USADA is showing them all these different ways that they can get away with it. That plus, USADA used to release before Picogate the results of the USADA testing to the public when a violation occurred. Then they changed their policy, and now you don't know till after the fact. Well, that's a little unethical, don't you think? It's to protect the fighters. No, it's to control the data. If you control what gets put out about the testing and when, you can hide tests. Which also shows me that the UFC can do some shady things. Can I prove this? No, I can't prove it. But I know human nature. And human beings are corrupt. And when billions of dollars, we're not talking millions, we're talking, well, for USADA, $1 million, and for the UFC, billions of dollars are involved. People are corrupt. They always have been. They always will be. It's never going to change. Money corrupts people, and anywhere there's big pots of cash, there's corruption. If you don't believe it, you must wake the fuck up. Corruption exists, and most people on those levels are going to be corrupt. So if the tests aren't being put out and being just, the UFC therefore can release and not release and control USADA in the way that they want to. And since they're being paid for, USADA's being paid for by the UFC, USADA doesn't want to lose one of their biggest multi-million-dollar contracts. They're going to play ball. You better believe they're going to play ball. So what does that allow the UFC to also do? They can also extort fighters. If a fighter tests dirty, they can come to that fighter and say, "Look, you popped for some kind of steroid, whatever the name of steroid. You popped for said steroid. Well, if we release this to the public, you're going to get a suspension. You're not going to make any money, and plus, your name and career is going to be tainted. See what just happened to T.J. Dillashaw? I mean, the dude's ruined. He's done. His career's over. They took the prime of his career, and he's done. It's over for him. He may come back. He'll never be a champion again. T.J. Dillashaw will never be a champion again. He'll never make the kind of money he was making before. He may fight again. He won't get the backing or the popularity if he even gets any push from the UFC at all, and he'll get paid crumbs of what he was getting paid before. The UFC can use this to blackmail people and get them to take dives and fight, or allow them to get into contracts that are less suitable for them, and the UFC makes more money. Let's look at John Jones. If nobody's paid attention to John Jones' pay, John Jones recently fought after Picogate versus Anthony Smith. And if you notice, people are making a lot more money now. Even Khabib made 2 million, and DC made over 1 million for his fight, and people are making more and more money. What did John Jones just make? For that fight, he made 500. It was either 450 or $500,000, and he sold more pay-per-views than he's ever sold before. So what's that tell you? Let's put two and two together. How is he making less than he's made before? I've seen paychecks of John over 1 million and 750,000. How is later on in his career, with a more selling fight, a more popular broadcast, is he actually making less money? It makes no sense unless you realize the UFC came to him and said, "John, you've popped again. We can play this narrative for you, but if we do that, you're going to get less money from us. Instead of making 1 million, we're going to pay you 500,000." They win off of all the publicity off the fight and all the people that wanted to see John win or lose. So it's advantageous to keep John there, but they're going to pay him less because John's in a situation that if he doesn't take that, then he's out for 4 years or even a mandatory lifetime ban, and he's not getting paid at all. So 500,000 is way better than zero. Think about that, people. How is he making less than he made before? And how is he still popping for something that there's no scientific evidence and being backed by Nowitzki and the UFC and everybody else, but then TJ gets crucified? It's simple. If you go back and you follow the money in anything, in any business, in any conspiracy, go back and follow the money, and you're going to see what's really going on, because the money is what talks, not what they put out. There's PR people and publicists that write this crap that are very smart and intelligent, that are able to look at normal people's IQs and dupe them and get them to buy into something that's ludicrous and bullcrap, because people don't think on their own anymore. They watch way too much TV, they're entertained, and their minds are taken over by bullcrap rather than being independent, critical thinkers. Think for yourself. John's making less, more popular, and he's popping for PEDs. USADA's not releasing results. Fights removed. Come on, guys. You can call me conspiracy theorist. You can call me whatever you want to call me, but I'm a realist. I'm a realist, and I can see what smells bad and what smells whatever. I've been involved in some pretty dirty crap in my life. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I've been a thug a lot of my life. I was a thug, and I've done some thuggish things, so I know what a scam is, and I know what a con and a racket is. I've been involved in that. You know what I'm saying? It's been 20 years I've been involved in anything, but I've been involved in things. So I'm saying I know what a racket is. This is a racket. They are playing people for fools. And if you think that the sport is any cleaner now than it's ever been, it's not. It's not. In fact, they're controlling what gets released and what doesn't get released, and what fighters are getting paid now, and what gets put out, what's being tested for, and who's controlling everything. And the UFC's controlling all of it. It's one of the dirtiest organizations in sports, but all sports are dirty. PD uses is rampant, and they're never going to get rid of this stuff because everybody's on it. For one, you take away PD usage, these guys are going to gas. You can't get hit in the face and run. When you wrestle 3 2-minute periods. That's 6 minutes. I was a wrestler. You're exhausted. I fought too. After one round, you're exhausted. You're tired. Ground fighting isn't as tired. I mean, hand fighting isn't as tiring throwing hands. You know, staying on your bike, you can get back up. I can keep a pretty good pace. But once you hit the mat and you're grinding, you're wrestling, very quickly you tire out. Now, these guys, they need things to help keep them going, not just from the fighting itself, but the actual training is diligent. Go if you've never gone to a wrestling practice, go to your local high school or college, see if you can go in and spend one afternoon training with these guys. You're going to be hurting for the next 3 days. You're going to feel like the first time you ever lifted weights, and you can't lift your arm up to the side of your body because It's tiring, man. It's taxing on the body. It takes a lot of time recovering. These guys cannot get the gains in these short careers, which peak in 2 to 3 years. And when they're at the top, they have 2 to 3 years max. So they're at the top of their game, and they have to use this time to the best of their benefit, increase their skills to maximize their profitability, make as money as they can get, and get out of the game before they get brain damage. That's the name of the game, because you see these guys that stay too long, and what happens to them? They end up with CTE. I know I've got freaking CTE. I'm crazy as hell, and your life has changed forever. And at some point you're going to be peeing and pooping in a diaper. That's how it rolls. I'm already at the point I'm stuttering and losing the ability to like I keep getting I'm talking here. I'm at a loss for words sometimes because I can't remember all the words. I can't put sentence construction together, and I have a master's degree in post grad work. Very smart person. I can't remember words anymore. These guys might necessarily be the sharpest tools either. Fighting is all they had, and yet they're still stuck in the game, getting hit in the face because they didn't make enough money because they're getting taken advantage of. While the UFC gets all that money, and these fighters don't get crap. So I know this was a super long video. If you listened, you listened. If you didn't, you did. I hope that something has opens your eyes and sparked your interest, at least let you think that you should think a little bit more critically. You don't have to agree with me if you think I'm full of crap, but think a little bit more critically and don't buy into a con. Have a good day. God bless.